Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webcast on achieving your goals in times of uncertainty. Trust everyone's keeping well and safe. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope this will be time well spent, and I hope the content will add value to you, your team, and your organization. My name is Sherif Selim. I am the Execution Regional Practice Leader with Franklin Covey Middle East. Before we start, I would like to thank my colleagues from Franklin Covey who are doing a great job during this challenging time and making this webcast happen. Some logistics before we get into the subject. I appreciate if you can start by muting your microphone, please. Since we're using an online platform, sometimes the noise from the mics can be a little bit distracting to everyone. So I really appreciate if your mic stays on mute throughout the presentation. However, if you have any comments or questions, please put that in the chat box on the side of the screen. And I suggest that you keep handy a pen and a piece of paper or a notepad, because we will be doing a number of activities today together. So this webcast is going to be quite interactive. We have about 50 minutes to spend together, or more if you like to stay a little bit more. We've dedicated about 40 to 45 minutes for this presentation, and we will spend as long as you like for the questions and answers at the end of this webcast. It's also important to mention that this webcast is going to be recorded, and it will be accessible, or it will be sent to you via email in the coming few days. Please, if you have any issues with connection, you can also send an email to info@franklincoveyme. ME stands for Middle East. So info@franklincoveyme.com, right at the bottom of the screen. And my colleagues who are connected right now will be able to help you. For your convenience, we will be sharing also with you a simple tool via email. This tool includes the activities we will be using together today in the exercises we do together in the webcast. So let us look at the agenda of today's webcast. I would like to start first with a couple of minutes to explain the premise or the context of this webcast. Then we will be working together to explore the challenges you are going through during this time of crisis, and building together the business case of execution in your team or your organization. Building on that, we will then look at Franklin Covey's approach to deal with such situation in order to achieve your goals in this time of uncertainty. And finally, we will have some time at the end, as long as you need, to exchange Q's and A's. So to give you some context on why we decided to come up with this webcast, which is one of a series of 4 webcasts delivered by my colleagues and I over a period of 4 weeks, we wanted really to be relevant in this current situation, but mainly we wanted to put Franklin Covey's know-how and expertise at your disposal, hoping this could help you in a way or another in this challenging time. So we decided back in February to start with a survey in order to understand the situation from your perspective, and to help us better understand your challenges so that we can adapt our message accordingly. And out of the 8 challenges we had in the survey, the top 3 were uncertainty in the future ahead, revenue losses, and the inability to achieve the goals set for this year. We found some answers into what could be done towards these challenges in the work of Stephen Covey and Bob Whitman, predictable results in unpredictable times, as well as in the content of other great literature we have here in Franklin Covey. The book Predictable Results mentions 4 hazards of unpredictable times that face every organization: crisis of trust, pervasive fear, failure to execute, and loss of focus. And this inspired us to come up with 4 webcasts Two of them were delivered already by my colleagues over the last 2 weeks, Stefan and I. There is one more to come on April 9th, same time with my colleague Nadeem, on maintaining productivity in unpredictable times. So if you have any questions about these 4 webcasts, please feel free to drop us an email on info@franklincoveyme.com. So let's work together for a few minutes to explore the challenges you are going through right now during this time of crisis. And I would like to build together with you the business case of execution in your team or in your organization if you are responsible for an entire organization. And I think the best way to start is to throw at you this question. So what are your team's must-win results? In other words, what are the 1 or 2 vital results that matter the most to your team or to your organization if you're heading an entire organization? So here are some examples to help you answer this question. So we're looking at things like revenue or profitability if you're in finance or if you're a GM. If you're looking after customer care, maybe you're recording customer satisfaction, and this is the must-win results for you. If you are in HR or employee engagement or talent management, for example, you probably are looking after employee engagement. Some of you, I've seen the list of participants for this webcast. They come from production companies who are concerned with production. Another key result you may be after is probably the speed of the service responsiveness. Or if you're in logistics or supply chain, you might be looking at stock forecasts of goods. So I would like you to take a minute on your own to write down what is the one key metric you are concerned with right now. Okay, I think this wasn't a very difficult question. So when it comes to those metrics, most likely you have started 2020 with different numbers, I guess, or targets than you have today. Well, everyone had to adjust, I guess, since the beginning of the situation, and still we are not 100% sure what is yet to come. When it comes to achieving results, there are things you can control, but there are also things that you cannot control. So let us first look at the things that you cannot control. Looking back at the previous weeks, I guess some of the examples include, some government directives that come at us on daily basis almost. Some businesses that I know of, they are booming right now, but they are actually facing a very weird challenge. They are facing some supply chain disruption, something like having difficulty to find shipping containers, for example. I guess as consumers ourselves, we have changed behaviors. Everybody has been impacted by the travel restrictions. I have 4 kids at home, so we've been impacted definitely with distance learning. Things like global markets crashing. Yesterday, the oil price went to a record low, below $20. So what I would like you to do for the next exercise is to take a couple of minutes and identify the top 2 or 3 things you cannot control over the past few weeks that had the most negative impact on your specific results or your specific activity. Please take a couple of minutes to do this exercise on your own. Right. So we are back, and I think some of you are answering questions in the chat box. That's perfectly fine. If you just joined us, you may do so in the chat box if you like, but also you can do this on a piece of paper on your own. There's no harm in doing that. So here's the thing. Now that we have identified the things that we cannot control, I don't think it's wise enough to spend some time focusing on that. For those of you who attended my colleague's session last week with May, she spoke about the circle of concern and the circle of influence, and all these distractions or these items actually fall in the circle of concern. So let's focus on the things that we can control. There are two main things you can control when it comes to producing your results: your strategy or your plan, and your ability to execute that strategy. Now that we are about 3 to 4 months into this crisis, you must have an idea or a plan on how to deal with the current situation, and you probably have plans B, C, D, and E. Today, we are not going to discuss these plans. Today, we are going to discuss the execution side, which is typically a bigger challenge than coming up with the plan. But why execution is so difficult? After all, if the plan is clear and you are driving it, won't the team naturally engage to achieve it? Well, the answer is not necessarily, and it's likely that your own experience has proven this more than once before in normal times. What about the time of crisis? Any initiative you drive in order to move your team or organization forward to achieve your must-win results will first require you to make what we call stroke of the pen decisions. Those are decisions you make when you have a certain level of authority and an allocated budget. So you might have made some of those decisions already, and here are some examples of decisions many organizations made in the past few weeks. So the typical one is working from home or changing work patterns into shifts, using air freight instead of sea freight, running promotions using technology and online platforms. Some companies are making some decisions about manpower reduction or restructuring or even expansion in some of the cases. So what I would like you to do right now is to take a couple of minutes on your own and identify 3 stroke of the pen decisions made in your team or your organization.
So, Sherif, Suzanne had a question about pen. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
All right, thank you very much, Maggie. Well, what we mean by stroke of the pen is, when you sign with your pen, the pen you're writing with. So this makes reference to any decisions. Well, obviously today in the technology age, we're using a lot of processes and online platforms, but signing a contract or signing a memo with your pen. So making a stroke of the pen decision, meaning that you're actually giving the go ahead to do something. If this makes it a little bit clearer, and I apologize. This is a term we use typically for this kind of decisions. Whenever you have a level of authority when you have a budget, so two conditions for that, authority and budget, you can just sign a piece of paper or a memo and make things happen. Right? Okay, so we're back together, and most of these decisions require people, and oftentimes many people, to change the way they do their work or do something completely new. In other words, we ask them to change their behavior. So this is the other flip of the coin. And here are some examples of behaviors that may be impacted by certain decisions. So working or being more productive while working from home, for example, or working with the process now remotely, or trusting technology. When it comes to customer service, now we're probably facing some challenges that will require us to deal with customers differently. Being able to respond quickly and swiftly when it comes to services while you're having some challenges related to the corona crisis, and maintaining the operational consistency due to these challenges. So over to you again. I would like you to spend a couple of minutes to building on the previous question of stroke of the pen decisions, and identify within your team or your organization what are the behaviors that have been impacted by the decisions you had identified previously. So obviously in each team or each organization, you have made some stroke of the pen decisions. So what were those behaviors that were impacted by those decisions? So let's take 2 minutes to do this exercise. So we are back and talking about behaviors. I'm going to share with you something you are very familiar with. While the majority of teams, so this graph, probably many people are familiar with this graph describing the pattern of performance in teams and organizations versus the number of people in a team. And we can see a couple of things. The majority of teams are usually compliant, and about 60 to 70% of population or teams, they are in this middle zone of compliance, while every organization has pockets of great performance, and this is about 15 to 20% of the population. I'm sure you know where they are in your organization. So you would also find significant variability in performance where not all the teams or individuals are performing like the great ones. Chronic inconsistency is a common characteristic in most organizations. So why is that so? Many organizations accept the shape of the variability curve as a given, and oftentimes they attempt to improve performance by repeatedly changing their strategy. They end up with the same variability curve again and again, leading to the flavor of the month kind of syndrome. So on top of this common challenge of chronic consistency, we are today taken by the whirlwind of events, news, statistics that is blowing at 150 miles an hour. So while stroke of the pen decisions can help you to achieve your results to a certain extent, these mandates only will not help you achieve the results you were hoping for or close the gaps created by the crisis. Sometimes those decisions even get in the way, causing distraction and confusion when we make too many decisions. On the other hand, behavior change, when it is driven by the desire for self-help and a sense of responsibility for the welfare of business continuity, to overcome this crisis is probably critical to achieve the results in such uncertainty. You may have a proven strategy, and I'm sure of that, for defeating this crisis. However, if your teams are just complying or being average in their performance, if they are not executing the plan with high consistency at their best performance, the consequences will be dramatic. So let's take a deep breath, because this has been quite negative so far. Calm down and go back to basics for a minute. We all know this equation: strategy multiplied by execution equals results. So if your strategy, which is very natural, is a constant, and well, some people may say, well, we've changed our strategy 2 or 3 times so far since the beginning of the year. Well, I'd like to challenge this for a second. You probably have reviewed your tactics, but your strategy is usually set for 3 to 5 years. The crisis is going to be over in hopefully few weeks, few months to be more realistic, and you will get back on track. So you probably change your tactics in your strategy, but the strategy usually stays constant for a number of years. So usually strategy is a constant. And based on what we have mentioned earlier, from chronic inconsistency and the whirlwind, usually execution is variable. And we learned in the early years in school, when you multiply a constant by a variable, you usually get a variable. And this is why our results are being variable. Today, in today's crisis, we cannot really afford to have variable results. So the question now is, if we have a constant strategy, how can we make our results as constant as possible? The answer is increasing the chances of having constant execution. In Franklin Covey, if there is one thing we have learned over the last 40 years, it's this one. To make things constant, you need to base it on principles. Principles are timeless, natural, universal laws that endure. They apply anytime, anywhere, to anyone. You can choose to ignore them, but they will not ignore you. So we are looking at 4 principles to be specific. Those are focus, leverage, engagement, and accountability. Well, a behavior change strategy requires discipline, probably a lot of discipline to apply those principles. I was talking to my colleague Suzanne a couple of days ago, and I was telling her, you know, in 2020, we were expecting to see flying taxis in the sky with lots of drones, yet we are now learning the discipline to wash our hands for 20 seconds, multiple times a day. So this concept of discipline creates really conditions that engage people in doing what's necessary in a must-win situation like this one, where special treatment and consistent behavior across a population of people are required for success. So We are going to look now at 4 specific disciplines based on those 4 principles and see how they can help you achieve your goals in this time of uncertainty. But I must warn you, those disciplines are counterintuitive. Each one of those 4 disciplines is paradigm shifting, really, and might even fly in the face of your intuition. As you implement each discipline, at least initially, you will be doing things that at first glance might not seem to make sense and that run counter to your instincts. Let me assure you, though, that the 4 disciplines we are going to talk about are the result of a serious, intense experimentation tested over many years with thousands of teams. The good news about this is that once you gain some experience with those disciplines, what seemed to be awkward in the beginning will become more comfortable and more effective. Here is another warning. The 4 disciplines we are going to talk about are a match set, not a menu of choice. While every one of the disciplines has value, the real power is in how they work together in sequence. Each discipline sets the stage for the next discipline. Leave one out and you'll have far less effective results. And finally, the disciplines will sound deceptively simple, but they take sustained work to implement. Don't be misled by the simplicity. The 4 disciplines are powerful in part because they are easy to understand and based on universal principles. But successful implementation takes significant effort over an extended period of time. It requires sustained commitment and, guess what? Discipline. But the payoff, however, is that you will not only achieve your goal, but also build the organizational muscle and capability to achieve the next goal and the next based on a resilient and agile culture of execution. Let us start with the first discipline. This will probably take the most of our time in these 4 disciplines. Discipline 1, focus on the wildly important, is based on the principle of focus. Why do almost all leaders struggle to narrow down their focus? It's not because they don't think focus is needed. Well, every time we work with leaders across the world and we ask them about this question, they agree that focus is needed. But despite this desire, they continue to find themselves with too many competing priorities, pulling their teams in too many different directions. And I'm sure you feel this right now. So one of the first things we want you to know is that you are not alone. And the inability of leaders to focus is a problem of epidemic proportions, just like the COVID-19. Here's what we know. If you focus on 2 or even 3 goals beyond the demands of your whirlwind, you can often accomplish them with excellence or with high quality. However, if you increase the number of goals, you'll be going backward, basically. Your team will lose focus, and confronted with too many goals, they might not even listen to you anymore. This is called the law of diminishing returns. You can choose to ignore it, but it will not ignore you. Today, I think more than ever before, you probably have 10 to 20 challenges or gaps you are running after right now. This discipline may even mean saying no to some great ideas. How difficult is that? So when we are desperate for any ideas to save us from the crisis, we will probably have to say no at times. But here's the thing. Nothing is more counterintuitive for a leader than saying no to a good idea, especially in this situation. And nothing is probably a bigger destroyer of focus than always saying yes to everything. I'd like to unlock with you the meaning of the word wildly, from wild. And there is no better illustration of this principle than an airport control tower. Right now, many airplanes might be approaching, taking off, or taxiing around. Probably not the case these days, since many airplanes are on the ground and lots of airports are closed. But this is how an air traffic controller screen looked like usually. So I want you to sit in this position for a minute and imagine what you have to deal with. For the air traffic controller, There is only one airplane is wildly important right now. The one that is landing or taking off at this time frame, during this time frame. The controller is aware of all other very important planes on the radar. She's keeping track of them, but right now, all her talent and expertise is solely focused on one flight. If she doesn't get that flight on the ground safely or in the air safely, if it's taking off with total excellence, then nothing else really she might achieve is really going to matter much. So she takes off or lands one wildly airplane at a time. So back to your situation right now, you might have many priorities to focus on, probably very important goals. But a wildly important goal is like that. It's the goal you must achieve with total excellence. It is the achievement that will make all the difference in such challenging times. Failure to achieve this goal renders any other achievement secondary. So how can you find your way? Let us do a small exercise together. I would like you to take your piece of paper again and your pen and draw two axes as you see on the screen. So the vertical one represents the importance dimension, while the horizontal one represents the gap. So go ahead and do this really quick. Now, what I would like you to do for the coming 2 minutes is to place your pressing priorities, your most important priorities you have right now on this matrix in terms of level of importance and the size of gap you have in each one of those priorities. But before you do this exercise, I want you just to be aware of one thing. Many leaders, when we ask them to do this exercise, they go ahead and put everything in the top right quadrant. Well, so please be reasonable and take a minute to think carefully before you place your priorities on the matrix. So I'm going to leave you for 2 minutes to do this exercise, and we'll get back together. So how do you feel after doing this exercise? Your matrix might look something like this probably, right? I hope. You may notice that in this example that I put on the screen, the most important priority does not really have a big gap. It's the top left one. So it's very high in terms of importance, but probably we're doing so great in this highly important priority and we're not having any gap. But this is not the one we're concerned with right now. The one that we're focusing on is the one key priority that you have on the top right corner of your metrics. So the question is, then what? What do I do with this? Now, here's the discipline. You must approach that wig with focus and diligence until it is delivered as promised with excellence. Dedicating 20% of your time and effort to this one wildly important goal or gap, perhaps, that doesn't mean you abandon all your other important goals. They are still on your radar, but they don't require your finest diligence and effort right now. Because it's your strategic tipping point, you're going to commit to apply a disproportionate amount of energy to it. The 20% that is not used up in the whirlwind. Well, until you reach excellence and your team change their habits when it comes to this particular goal or gap. So this is really about the discipline of drawing the line between the 20% of your energy and time dedicated to this wildly important goal while you are still running the whirlwind of the daily work. The wig must contain a clearly measurable result, as well as the date by which that result must be achieved. This is from X to Y by when, and this is a format that recognizes where you are today, your X, where you want to be, your Y, and the deadline for reaching that goal. Many organizations use the SMART objectives kind of format. This is exactly the same concept. So SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. A small warning though, as deceptively simple as this formula may seem, many leaders often struggle to translate their strategic concepts into a single from X to Y by when finish line. But once they've done this, both they and their teams have gained tremendous clarity. So here are some questions that may help you help your thinking process at that stage. So what is the wildly important priority you have? So this could be a goal or a gap. In both cases, we use the acronym WIG for wildly important goal or a gap. How do you measure it right now? You need to have a reliable measuring methodology or a tool. What is it as of today, and what would you like it to be, and by when? And the difference between the two values, X and Y, we call this your execution gap. So let me share with you some examples of wildly important goal that might be quite relevant to today's situation. So if you are in retail, for example, you definitely are having a challenge with all the outlets closed. So you probably would like to focus a little bit more strategically on the online sales. So your wildly important goal might look like this: increase online sales from 1.2 million to 1.8 million by December 31st. If you are handling projects, or if you're managing projects with lots of projects coming on your desk right now, you probably are faced with the challenge to complete certain specific projects as quickly as possible. So you might want to focus on reducing your project cycle time by 25%, big or small those projects might be. If you are in consultative sales, you might be facing a challenge with your client base right now. So you probably need to focus more strategically on those booming industries, such as medical equipment companies, production, online services, etc. So your wildly important goal might be increase new accounts in those booming industries from 10 to probably 250 by the end of Q2. Good luck. If you are in production, you might have started 2020 with a plan for having 4 shutdowns this year. So with the challenges we are facing today, you may wish to reduce your plant shutdowns from 4 to 2 by December 31st, and so on and so forth. These widely important goals that are normally aiming at achieving your must-win results, or you're probably the biggest part of your must-win results, we call them also lag measure. The reason why we use the word lag, because the efforts made to achieve those results are lagging in the past. So there has to be a relationship between your battles and wars. Let me explain. Once you identify your wildly important goal, or we call it lag measure from X to Y by when, let's call this your war that you must win. So you need to go back to your teams and get them respectively to identify their own lag measures or their own widely important goals. And these would be the battles that will help you win your war. And we are creating a huge alignment across the organization, top down. So what I would like you to do to conclude discipline 1 is to take a minute or so to find your own wig right now. Typically, this brainstorming exercise should be done with your team, and it may take a few hours, so no pressure. I'm going to just give you probably 1 hour and a half to do this. Go ahead. Okay, so discipline 2 is the discipline of leverage. Act on the lead measures. Lead measures are the measures of the activities most connected to achieving the goal. The second discipline is to apply disproportionate energy to the activities that drive your lead measures. This provides the leverage for achieving the lag measures. Discipline 1 takes the wildly important goal for an organization and breaks it down into a set of specific measurable targets until every team has a wildly important goal that it can own. Discipline 2 then defines the leverage actions or activities or behaviors that will enable the team to achieve the goal. Once you have defined your wildly important goal, it would seem natural, even intuitive, to then create a detailed plan listing all the specific tasks and subtasks required to achieve the goal in the coming weeks or months. But with discipline 2, that is not going to be the case. With discipline 2, you do something quite different from that. This discipline requires you to define the daily or weekly measures, the achievement of which will lead to the goal. Then each day or week, your team identifies the most important actions that will drive those lead measures. In this way, your team is creating a just-in-time plan that enables them to quickly adapt while remaining focused on the wig, which is probably the most needed skill right now. Let me illustrate this with an example that we all can relate to these days. If your must-win result is to kill this coronavirus, our wildly important goal, all of us today, in a way or another, is to flatten the curve from X to Y by when. So our lead measures of applying social distancing include very specific daily practice measures that have the biggest impact on achieving the goal and that are highly influenced by us. Therefore, lead measures must be highly predictive of achieving the goal and highly influenceable by you and your team. The best organizations know where their pockets of greatness reside. They know also who their best performers are and what their leverage behaviors might be. They are better than the others at scaling greatness across the organization and institutionalizing their own best practices or leverage behaviors, getting everyone's behavior to change and making their performance curve brighter and tighter. Here's a question that can help you at that stage. Who has to do what differently or more consistently in order to achieve the WIG? Here are some examples building on the lag measures we identified in the previous discipline. So if your lag measure is about increasing online sales, you probably need to focus on training your teams on online platform. If you are concerned with reducing project cycle times, you are going to follow project management steps. If you want to increase new accounts, you want to qualify prospects only in booming industries, and so on and so forth. So last exercise for you to do is to take a minute and try to identify the top 1 or 2 leverage activities that can have the biggest impact on your WIG. Go ahead, just 1 minute. Before we carry on, I have a question from one of the participants about the word lag. Lag is not an acronym, it's not an abbreviation, it's a word that means in the past, something that happened in the past. And this is why lag measures are probably not the best to focus on, because by the time you get those measures, by the time you get, for example, the safety report, the incidents happened already in the past. And this is the reason why they're not very effective. We do need to have lag measures in order to observe the performance of the organization or of the team. But if we are to influence the achievement of the goals and hit the must-win results, we really need to shift our focus towards the lead measures. And this is what is counterintuitive about discipline number 2. So to conclude this second discipline, there is a bad news, there is a good news, and then there is another bad news. And I'm quoting William Edwards Deming, the father of the quality movement, when I'm mentioning these 3 pieces of information. First, bad news. It is going to really test your level of discipline to track your lead measures. This is why narrowing the number of goals in discipline 1 is so critical. Edward Deming said, without data, you are just another person with opinion. Here's the good news. People engage when they feel like they are valued members of a winning team doing stuff that matters in a high trust environment. So getting people to identify for themselves their WIGs and their lead measures is really an engaging process. And finally, more bad news. No matter how engaged your team is in identifying the lead measures, they will probably forget about them within 5 days. Do not underestimate the effects of the situation and the distraction of the whirlwind. And this is why discipline 3, keep a compelling scoreboard, is so important. Scoreboards help address the winning team part of the engagement. You can't win if you are not keeping score. If you're going to beat the coronavirus, you need to keep score. Scoreboards, when done right, give people access to data, and data is like light. Light lets people see, and light is an amazing disinfectant. For scoreboards to be effective, they need to show how we're performing on the goal and how we're doing on the lead measures. They also need to tell us where we are versus where we should be at any given moment. And that will tell us if we're winning or losing. Right now, we wake up every day on the number of infections and deaths. We know we are, for the most part of this, losing, but we don't have access to the data that shows exactly why. We're tracking the lag measures, but we're not tracking really how we're doing with the levers of success, which are the lead measures. The same thing happens in organizations. You're probably now more focused on the lag measures and the results more on the lead measures. You know, I struggled to find this scoreboard that shows how Brightons are doing with the lead measures of social distancing and comparing them to the other nations. But the question is, how effective is that really? This scoreboard is not showing us the cause and effect relation between the lead and the lag measures. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I would like to share with you a very simple scoreboard to illustrate my point about scoreboards. Really quick, this is a very simple scoreboard that illustrates the performance of a team represented by this red man to achieve a specific goal by the end of 10 weeks represented horizontally. So they are about 4 weeks away from the deadline. But you have the gray line represented by the green goat that tells them where they should be at every step, at every week checkpoint. So we could see that for the first 4 weeks, this team was winning. However, over the last week, we started seeing a gap. The primary stimulus for your actions is the mental tension you create in your mind when you become aware of the gap between where you are and where you should be. Once you become aware of this gap, you'll definitely begin to find ways to bridge it. A team scoreboard is different from a leader scoreboard in many ways. It should be simple, highly visible to the team at all times, includes all the right information, and determines if the team is winning or losing straight away. It should be also fun and personalized, reflecting the team's unique identity in order to make it attractive and compelling enough, as you can see on the screen in 3 of those scoreboards. However, we are all working remotely right now, so you probably want to consider a simple Excel sheet that you would like to share online with your team. Bottom line here is that your team members need to feel part of this winning team and that their contribution really matters. This could be quite challenging when they are working remotely. Accountability increases the likelihood of winning because it supports persistence in the face of adversity, boredom, discouragement, and distraction. Basically everything we're living these days. Right in the middle of the word accountability is the word count. We're counting on each other to do our individual parts to fight this tiny infection and win the war. We're also counting everything we are doing. So accountability is a performance improving mechanism that helps us to do better and stay focused on the objective in the face of competing priorities, fatigue, remote work, and other challenges. In times of crisis, the cadence of accountability you may wish to consider could be several times a day because we are in a mode of crisis. But under normal circumstances, you probably want to consider daily or weekly rhythm. This discipline asks people to get together on regular rhythm and do 3 things each time they meet. Report on last week's commitments, review and update the scoreboard, and make commitments for the following week. When making commitments, we should think of activities out of the routine. Work we do by answering one critical question repeatedly. What are the 1 or 2 things I will do between now and our next accountability session to help the team win? As busy as we are, when we voice a commitment to others, our integrity kicks in and we usually perform better because we don't want to let others down by not following through. Another key advantage is agility, especially in times of constant change that we're living in today. If you track your team's performance against where they should be and you hold regular accountability sessions, you can spot immediately the change in the team's performance, whether the change is internal or external, and adjust to the change within a short span of time. To conclude, once you identify or you make it clear your must-win results, you really need to narrow down your focus on one or maximum two wildly important goals that have to be measurable. And you need to identify the one or two key leverage activities that can help you achieve this wildly important goal, and create a regular cadence of accountability to drive these activities. And make sure you're recording everything you're doing in a compelling scoreboard. That was for me everything talking about the 4 disciplines of execution. I would like to thank you very much. Now, I understand some of you have to leave us right now. They have other engagements. So what I would like to do is, first of all, thank you very much for your time. I would like to remind you that we have other webcasts to come up. The next one is going to be on April the 1st, Activating the 7 Habits in Times of Crisis, by my colleague Mali Jabri, and another one on April 9th by Nadeem on maintaining productivity in unpredictable times. And you're going to be notified through email for these ones. So the other thing is the tool that I mentioned earlier, you're going to be receiving this via email as well. So for those of you who will have to leave us right now, I would like to thank you very much. Stay safe, and hope to connect with you soon. I would like also to tell you that we will be sending you the recording of this webcast through email. So for those of you who still have a few minutes to go, I'd like to open the floor now for any questions and answers. And please record your questions in the chat box. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and stay safe for those of you who want to leave us. But please, I'll be very happy to answer any questions.
Sherif, we have a question from Ali. He says, what measures should be taken to improve customer interaction as people are not open to personal meetings?
Well, thank you very much, May, and thank you, Ali, for the question. I think we need to take a step back and look for some creative approach or different ideas. One key dimension you need to take in consideration when it comes to this dynamic is to engage your teams. People engagement or team engagement is critical to this process. You probably need to take a step back and gather your team and brainstorm. You never know what can they come up with. They may come up with great ideas that you as a leader never thought of in the past. As Edward Deming said, the people who are within 12 feet of the work, they are the best to know the relation between effect and results. So I really recommend that you should go for a brainstorming exercise with your team to get the ideas from them. I honestly don't have all the answers, but people who are working in this industry, your colleagues, definitely may have the right answer. I understand that we as customers today, we have different behaviors. We've changed our behaviors. We're not open. We probably don't have budget to spend on a lot of luxury. But you probably want to consider some other options, some other giveaways, some other initiatives, some give back to your clients to keep them engaged somehow. Ali, I hope I answered your question, but definitely the best answer resides in your team. So brainstorming with your team is probably key to this question.
Thank you for that, Sherif. We have another great question. What would be a lead measure for you in delivering a webinar? Sherif?
This is a tricky one. I think for me, and for many of us who are new to using this kind of medium in delivering, to be honest, I'm not very comfortable sitting in front of a screen and a camera and delivering. I prefer to interact more with people in a room. And I think a key lead measure for me was the number of hours spent to practice. Hope this helps.
Thank you. Another question for you, Sherif. How to focus on only 2 or 3 goals and ignore the unimportant or the not important?
Right. I just want to have a comment on the word ignore. This approach doesn't mean that we have to ignore everything else. As a matter of fact, we cannot really ignore everything. We need to keep all these important things on our radar. And when we get into the habit of focus, many times I hear people saying, you know what, after we actually practice this for a while, we realize that many of the goals we had in the past were not supposed to be there in the first place. So one thing is, and discipline one is not suggesting that we should ignore everything we're doing and focus on 2 or 3 goals only. The idea is to dedicate 20% of our energy towards these 2 or 3 goals that really make the difference, that matter the most, while maintaining everything else in the whirlwind and give it about 80% of our time and energy.
Thank you, Sherif. Another question. We are at a government agency and facing problems of not having specific goals. So if we need to put new goals for this crisis, what can we do?
This is a great question, and many people in many government entities around the world, they work with this dynamic because they have mandates. So what we strongly recommend is to really come up with measurable priorities or goals, even if they are 2 or 3, but make sure that they are measurable. A good exercise to do is what we have done earlier, identifying your wildly important goals. So you want to take the mandates from the government, probably the mission and the vision, and try to brainstorm with your team to understand, and you probably want to use this question, what are our top priorities in our team today? You can use the word priority. If the word goal is not common in your area, you can simply use what are our top priorities that we want to focus on. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, Sherif. That is really important. Another question from Mateo. Why will you put only 20% of your energy of the most important goal? Would you not put more effort so you can execute it quickly and then focus on the next one?
Well, Mateo, let's be realistic here. You probably have 10 to 15 things you really want to work on, and everybody does today. So let's look at the 80-20 Pareto law. If you focus 20% of your energies on the 1 or 2 things that will help you achieve 80% of your results, that will be really great. it will be really great to do so, because we all have other things to do in the whirlwind, and the whirlwind from the outside keeps throwing at us surprises every day, especially during the time of crisis. So we just want to be relevant and realistic and say, if we have the discipline to maintain this 20% of energy, you will see the difference. Believe me, I've seen it happening many times, and that makes a huge difference. So I hope I answered the question.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, Mirvat, the Q&A will be included in the recording. And Sherif, another question for you. Can I share this knowledge with my team, and how?
There are many ways you can share the knowledge, this knowledge with your team. Well, first of all, everything I said today is in a book with the same title, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. So this book is available today in the regions market in both English and Arabic, by the way, having some case studies from the region, from Saudi Arabia, to be very specific, a company called Sibkim in the petrochemicals. But we will be sharing the recording of this webcast with you via email. And there are lots of videos on Franklin Covey's official YouTube channel. If you go to the playlist, you can find one of the playlists entitled Execution, and there are a few very interesting videos that you can watch with your team.
Great. And a question from Muhammad. Is it important to understand the 7 habits to be more effective in learning 4DX, I assume?
Well,
put 4D, but it's 4DX.
I'm a big fan of the 7 habits, and I think I don't know, maybe I am biased, but the 7 habits is the foundation of everything we do in life. If this statement is applicable, but it is definitely applicable to me. And I think the 7 habits definitely is a great foundation to understand the 4 disciplines of execution. However, if you don't have a previous knowledge of the 7 habits, the knowledge we share today are based on principles. And if you ask anyone about these principles, everybody will say, well, this sounds really logic to me. It's just the way they are put into a very structured manner makes it much easier, applying those principles into what we call the 4 disciplines of execution.
Totally agree with you, Sherif. Thank you so much for this really beneficial webcast. I think all of us would benefit from applying all of the principles that you talked about. And this concludes our webcast for today. Thank you so much for joining us. And please stay tuned for the other webcasts that we have scheduled. And we will be sharing a recording of this webcast plus the tool that Sherif mentioned. Thank you so much and have a good day. Stay safe.